Welcome to the show. My name is Scott Bakken, and I'm a content creator from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I also lead a creative community called Sociality, which is all about connecting people online and bringing them together for face-to-face experiences. We also just launched a digital membership called the Sociality Membership, which is all about empowering and connecting artists all over the globe through masterminds, mentorship, and unique experiences. So make sure to check out sociality.org for more, and I'd love to see you in the membership. My guest today is an incredible artist, a Canadian icon, a legend, a country music superstar, and an advocate and a social justice voice for many people. Through his organization, Not My City, he is shining a light on sex slave trafficking and human trafficking and helping put that to an end. At the same time, helping survivors and helping them come back to a full life. It is an incredible mission. He's an incredible musician, father, husband, songwriter, storyteller, and I know today you are going to enjoy this conversation with the one, the only Paul Brandt. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All right, look who we have in the studio today with us.
Oh, Scott, it's so good to be here with you.
Oh, it's so good to have you.
Yeah.
Mr. Paul Brandt.
Fun. This is fun.
And
Who's calling?
It's probably my mom. Mom's call at the...
Oh, this is so good.
They always call...
I heard you were doing a podcast, and I wanted to know who you're talking to.
When I lived in Australia, she would just call me whenever she felt like it.
Okay.
And it was always in the middle of the night. And I'd be like, can you just buy a clock?
It'll be the one you can call Scott clock.
Yeah, and just say, I don't need a clock.
Yeah.
I'll call you whenever I want. You're my son.
right.
I call you when I want.
She's mom, absolutely.
That's my mom.
That's good.
But moms do this.
Yes.
They call us whenever they want. Anyway, it's good to have you here.
Great to be here.
Great to have Mr. Canada.
Oh,
I call you Mr. If there was like a competition, you'd be Mr. Canada.
Really? That's
why
good.
not?
I like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
you represent us well.
Well, I just got off tour with another country singer, Terry Clark. I was on tour with her across the entire country we left end of October, and all of November we were going across the country and singing together. We were on stage together at the same time and singing each other's songs, but also trying to mess each other up.
Yes.
Like it was a blast. It was like
Yes.
sibling rivalry in full effect. And
Yes.
and the fans just absolutely loved it. They had a great time. Some of the places that we went to play, it was the first concert that had been in those venues since the pandemic. So
Right.
the sense in the
Yes.
audience was, we need this. Like it wasn't just, this is a fun concert.
Right.
It was just pure community and people having a great time together. And you felt that Canadian spirit when you got Terry Clark, Paul Brandt on stage together, talking about waving that Canadian flag all over the world where we've performed. It was pretty cool. So
that's so cool. You know what I love about that is you really, because if you're going on tour, you're really touching the heartbeat of the Canadians. Yeah. Are you hearing their stories? Like, are you hearing?
Yeah.
And it must differ from province to province, you know?
Totally. You get like backstage in the times for meet and greets, you get to not only meet new people, but people who've been a part of your career. Like for me, I've been doing this for 28 years. I've been traveling all over the world singing country music for people for that long. So you develop relationships. You get to know people. You get caught up. How's it going? It's been a while since we've been on the road. And you hear their stories too. And I think social media in a lot of ways has really made that world a lot smaller now because in the past it was, okay, there's a newspaper or there's a magazine, and that's the only access except for radio and recordings that people have. And now, I mean, it's like, if a fan has a question and I don't answer it, I look like I don't care.
Right.
And so, you have an opportunity to be there, and there's really no divide.
Right.
And I love that. It's cool. It's much more of a relationship now.
Right. And so it must be so rewarding when people are telling you stories of how songs that you've written have gotten them through tough times. Like, is this what they're telling you?
Yeah, I think that, my number one song, the first number one, when I first launched, was a song called I Do. It's a wedding song. And so, a lot of people have their stories about how that impacted them and they used it in their wedding or they used it for an anniversary or whatever. I think that one of the things that we try to do with music, for me, it's always been about entertainment, but it's about escape. It's about enlightenment. It's about education, just pure entertainment. And you kind of, each song has a little bit of a different way of doing that. I mean, like, you're not getting enlightened with Convoy, but you're having a really great time, right? But like, there's a song that we have called Together Again that talks about, a person passing away and just that hope to be, being able to be together again at some point. And incredibly meaningful stories have come from that one. So yeah, it's you become a part of the fabric, I think, of people's lives when you're able to be, you can use your art and your creativity to connect.
Right.
And I was in a group the other day in some of the work that we do related to combating human trafficking. We have an organization called Not in My City, and we were talking about how you can use words, but there's a moment where you actually connect with another person's spirit. And music does that in a way that almost nothing else can.
It's funny because I'll often hear a song and I remember where I was in that moment. Like there's certain songs you hear it and you're like,
back.
I was turning this corner. Like every time I hear that song, I think of this spot or this place or that person. Music really does do that to people, doesn't it?
It does. I think that, I'm not sure what part of your brain it's accessing, but I mean like sights and smells and places and memories, all those kinds of things, it just triggers all of that.
Right.
And it's pretty powerful. It's a powerful, I think a powerful artistic force. And there's something I think very spiritual when it comes to music that just connects people. I have a song that I've been working on. We're just finished recording the tracks in Nashville, and I'll be doing vocals on it soon. It's called Buffalo Bones, and it was written as sort of a historic fiction of the early 1900s and what happened as people came across the prairies to Alberta and some of the things that they saw. And I was in a meeting where me and a counterpart, someone I was working with on this, who was Indigenous, we weren't seeing eye to eye on something, and we couldn't figure out a way to make it work. And even at times it got quite heated in the conversation. And so we had set a date to get back together again, and I just could not figure out for the life of me how I was going to help her to understand how much I cared about her and this issue and being able to work together. And I wrote this song called Buffalo Bones, and it connected us in a really unique way. And that's, I think, one of the things I've always loved about music.
It really does. It really just, I can imagine for you, because you've been writing, because you were sort of writing, and what age were you?
Well, I was 6 years old, and my parents started attending a church, and we were not a church family up until that point at all.
In Alberta?
Right?
Was this Alberta?
Yeah, in Alberta.
Yeah.
And that church was a very, I would say, like there were a lot of rules, a very legalistic kind of a place, and rules weren't necessarily rooted in any theology of any kind, but just kind of rules to control. And but one of the things that was really good about it, I think for me, is that the speakers who spoke from the King James version of the Bible, and they would rip all the words apart and into original Hebrew and Greek and Latin. And I was 6, had never been in a church before, and I loved the words. And I just really gravitated towards that, started reading the thesaurus, started reading the dictionary, started reading a book called Bartlett's Quotable Quotes, and I started writing poetry. And I didn't have any influence other than these words are really cool. I was just a total word nerd. And the poems, by the time I was about 13, my parents had shifted, and they started attending a church where there was less rules, more grace, and those two worlds collided, and I got a guitar. And I realized all of a sudden that, as I was given musical tools, that these poems I'd been writing were actually songs.
Wow.
And it all started to come together, right? And for me, that was kind of how my musical journey began at about 13 years old.
Did the guitar come easily to you?
It's funny because I loved the instrument. I obviously had no background in it at all. And my mom thought it was wonderful. And so she got me lessons. And it was Royal Conservatory, so it's pretty stodgy.
Yeah.
And the guy, this guy comes in and he shows me what I'm supposed to learn and all the musical notes, and he's teaching me everything and technique and everything. And he'd say, okay, practice this for next week. And he'd come back and he'd say, okay, show me what you practiced.
Right.
And I would never practice. I hated practicing, right? I would just play something that was horrible, right?
Yeah.
And he'd go, no, he'd be so frustrated. He'd say, not like that, like this. And he would play it. And I'd go, oh, and I'd play it back, which made him even more angry that I could do that, right? And so for me, a lot of it was by ear,
right?
And just watching what other people were doing. And I think there are limitations in that. I think if I could speak the language of music, if I read better, that it would have been a good thing in the studio. But I'll never forget, I was taking guitar lessons. This would have been, I would have been probably around 20 years old. And I thought, I got to improve. I got to get better. And
by then, aren't you a recording artist?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
So I was entering talent contests, and I was actually working as a registered nurse at the Alberta Children's Hospital.
Wow.
And I thought music was a passion, but I didn't think I could do it.
For sure.
It was what I loved, and it was honestly, I think in some ways it was therapy. It was an expression, right? And So I'm taking these lessons from this guy, and then I get a call from a major record label in Nashville, Tennessee, and they offered me a record deal.
Wow.
And I came over to lessons that day, and I was like, dude, I think I just got a record deal. And he looks at me, he goes, dude, you're not ready. Yeah. It's like, no, And so, yeah, it was, all of a sudden I was thrown in.
Wow.
And it was like sink or swim.
Wow. And what was it that got you the record deal? Was there a song that you were pitching?
So I was entering these talent contests.
Yeah.
One of them was at the Calgary Stampede.
Okay, of course.
And I started getting noticed by different people in the music industry.
Right.
And, we kind of played into it a little bit. You talked about your mother earlier, and my mom, huge supporter, and she would help me put these packages together to send out to people, check out my music and everything. And I came home from work at the hospital one day. I was working at the Alberta Children's, still mooching off my parents, living at home, and Dad's sitting on the couch with this just really kind of weird, vacant look on his face. He's like, there's a message on the phone for you.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, okay. So I pick it up and I hear this Southern accent. Yeah. She says, hey, my name's Paige Levy. I'm with Warner Reprise Nashville. Wow. I signed Dwight Yoakam to the record company and I heard your demo. I think you're real good. She said, I want to come up to Calgary and hear you and your band play. You give me a call, right? So I hang up the phone, pick it up. I'm like, yes, ma'am, please come to Calgary and hear me play, right? And I hung up the phone and I called a friend and I'm like, buddy, you have to help me put a band together. I didn't have a band. Like I was playing in coffee shops down on 4th, playing in my basement, whatever, but I didn't have a band. So we put a band together. She came up here and played a little honky-tonk here in Calgary next to the Ranchman's that was called the Longhorn Saloon.
I remember that.
Okay, and the next week signed a record deal and away we went.
Okay, this is crazy because this is pre-social media.
Yeah.
So this was like you really had, because when I was a kid, I wanted to be a singer and I always thought like you had to like put a cassette in and like send it to Clive Davis.
Yeah, for sure.
I thought this is one way I thought. Like obviously I never did that. But these were the days where you would have, there was no like texting, so you're literally like someone's hearing you, they're calling you on an answering machine,
right,
and and they're kind, and are you thinking this isn't happening, this girl's not coming?
No, I didn't. I think for me it was I didn't really think you could do this, and so it was almost like, okay, if that worked, then I'm just going to lean in a bit more. If that worked, well then I'll try this. Right. The process was talent contests, and one of them went out to Eastern Canada. And the Canadian section of that business, it was Warner Brothers Records. They saw me sing out there, and their A&R person, their artist and repertoire, came to me and they said, "Hey, we think you're really good. We'd like to offer you a record deal." And I had this thing, and I think for creatives, one of the things that I really try and help people to see is, often I think in life what we think about is what are the limitations, and we start there. What's the budget? Right, and for me as a songwriter, it's always sky's the limit, and you have to sort of dare to suck. You have to be willing to fail, and then just fail more quickly. And so I said to them, I really appreciate this record deal offer, but I see the entire world that really wants to do their art at the highest level going to Nashville. So would you take this tape and send it to Nashville? And if they're interested, maybe they could give me a call. So it was like, there's no limitations. I wasn't worried about losing the deal. I just wanted to do my art at the highest level. Right. And it started to open doors, So, I mean, when she showed up that day, it was like, this is real.
Wow.
This is the person. And I knew her name. Like I was a huge Dwight Yoakam fan. Yeah. So I knew her name from
you knew of
liner
her.
notes and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, you were one of those? I love
totally.
that.
I miss that so much.
When I got CDs as a kid, I would read all the liner notes, and I knew other writers, the producers. That's missing now.
I feel sorry for, I think, these generations that are in digital music, because they do miss the inside of the music industry in that way.
I was having an argument with a photographer about this because he had posted something and he didn't credit some of the people.
Okay.
And he didn't think it was a big deal. He's like, who cares? I'm like, and I actually referenced this. I said, actually, as a kid, I loved listening or looking through and seeing the songwriter and like the producer, the executive producer, and all that stuff. And I felt like I was into that world because of the liner notes. Yeah. And it's like Star Wars, these people, they know everybody who does everything.
Totally.
And, I think it does mean something, but I think a little bit of that is lost on this generation.
Yeah, I had my manager when I first moved to Nashville, his name's Pete Fisher, great guy. And Pete, I ended up actually being the manager for the Grand Ole Opry for years. Right. He's probably the longest serving general manager at the Grand Ole Opry. And when he moved to Nashville as a young guy, he was a trumpet player. Yeah. And he moved to Nashville thinking, I'm going to be a session player. This is what I'm going to do. And then he started to see how many absolutely insanely talented trumpet players. There already were in Nashville. And he realized that's never going to be me. But because of the liner notes, because of the understanding that it takes an army to do anything of meaning with art. It really does. Yeah. You know, he knew that he would be able to find a unique space within the industry.
Right.
And I think it's harder, for creatives today to understand that concept, you know. And I think technology has reduced barriers so much that we can do a lot more on our own. But if you ever want anything to be a movement, it takes everybody.
It takes a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so you get this record deal. She shows up like a movie, scene from a movie.
Crazy.
You're singing.
Yeah.
There she comes in the back,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
the little, I can
Totally.
see it, you know, and you know she's there.
Oh, yeah.
Had you met her before this?
No.
Or, so she's watching.
Yeah.
You nervous?
Totally.
Oh,
Dying.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I think also, you know, there were people who had supported me, you know, just coming to the coffee shop, you know, who every Tuesday night, there's the same people. Such a small place. It was called the Cowboy Cafe. I don't know if you were here when that was there.
No.
It was like a hallway of a building.
Wow.
And I literally had to get out of the way when someone had to go to the bathroom, you know, like they spill their coffee on you, you know, and you're playing away. Those people were out there dancing and they created a scene for me, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I was nervous and
singing originals?
some originals, and she had sent up some music that she wanted me to work up with the band,
Right.
And just to see where my vocal range was and all that, and so yeah, about a week later she followed up and she was like, "So, are we doing this?" And you know, back in the 30s, when someone was approached by Hollywood, there was a system called the starlet system, and it was you were a starlet before you were a star. And this was a similar process at that time in the music industry around 1994, 95, 96, that era, where they would sign a person to what they call a development deal. And they would literally like film mock interviews. They would film mock music videos. They would get you meeting producers and recording with different producers to see what they were hearing. And they would put you with songwriters to see if you could actually, you know, if you put your money where your mouth was, right? Yeah, totally, right? And after we had done that, I was still working at the Children's Hospital, and every other month I'd go down to Nashville and I'd have those opportunities to meet all these different people. And we recorded 4 songs with incredible producer named Josh Leo. The song "Fishing in the Dark." I don't know if you know that one. So he produced "Fishing in the Dark."
Classic.
He produced "I'm in a Hurry" and "Don't Know Why" for Alabama.
These are big hits.
Amazing guy.
Amazing
and
songs.
We worked on 4 songs together.
Yeah.
And 3 of those songs ended up making it onto my first album. Once we recorded those 4 songs, I think the label felt the confidence that, yeah, this guy's ready and let's go.
Right.
And so away we went. And I went from working at a children's hospital and playing in coffee shops to doing 180 shows a year. I wasn't opening shows. I was like going out and I was the guy.
You were the
like,
headliner.
It was crazy how fast it went. And that era of country music, you know, I think music tends to do this where you get one big success, like you get a Taylor Swift, and then the industry feels like they have to build 50 more Taylor Swifts.
That's right. Yeah.
And I was in the era that Garth was riding the highest part of his career. So if you're a young male country artist with a black cowboy hat, you get a record deal, right? And so it was great timing. And I'll never forget getting on that bus with, in essence, 11 strangers. Like this is my new band that I've just been introduced to.
So you finally got a band together.
Finally got a band, right? But I barely knew these guys. It was like, hey, they're all in Nashville to try and do the same thing that I'm doing, right? And we're in this bus. There's like 12 bunks, and you're flying down the highway. Some stranger's driving the bus, and you're going to your first show. And I'm laying there, feet to the front in case there's an accident so you don't hit your head when they stop. And you feel the rumble of the blacktop and the tires going over the blacktop. And I just remember thinking to myself, what did I do? Like, what is this? It was such an adventure, you know. And when you're 21 years old, I mean, it was amazing. And we were touring the world.
And probably overwhelming because you're 21.
Yeah, and I don't think you can completely appreciate it either.
Yeah.
Like even the opportunity.
Right.
You know, obviously there's thankfulness and excitedness, but looking back on it now is just an amazing opportunity.
But you're 21, how do you not get cocky?
Well, you know, actually, that's a great question, and I'm not saying that I wasn't. I heard a songwriter describe very colorfully a cocky person one time, and he said, "That boy's a me burger with eye sauce." He said, I thought that was great.
A
you know, me burger with eye sauce. You know,
hilarious.
he's so into himself.
Yeah,
and I am at times, and definitely was me burger with eye sauce, and right around that time, I met my wife Liz, who's now my wife. We've just actually. On the 22nd of February, had our 27th anniversary.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. And she was on the road with me. And I'll tell you, there's nothing.
And she's American.
Yeah, she is. She's born in California, and there's nothing that'll keep you honest and on the straight and narrow than having your partner with you. You know, and Liz is very different than I am. She's very musical, but she's very pragmatic, very kind of binary. You know, beautiful access to her emotions, but rarely shows them. She's analytical. And
straight shooter.
Yeah. And she, and I would say my family often would, they don't let you get too far above your raising. They remind you, you know, of what the important things are. And I'm very thankful for that. I think it's important to have people who are objective in your life and not surround yourself with yes people. The best friends are the ones who aren't only nice, because nice, you don't really say anything, but they're kind. And the people who are kind are the people who will say the things that are hard. And I've had a wealth of those types of people in my life. So it's
right.
Yeah.
So she's keeping you on straight and narrow.
Yeah.
Keeping you like feet grounded.
Yeah.
You're 21. You're hitting the road. Is this mainly through America? You're traveling
all over the world. We were.
Oh wow.
You know, we were in the U.S. doing the fair circuit quite a bit, and we were playing up here in Canada, playing actually quite a few like Jubilee type. I would say probably 2,800 seats, that type of thing, here in Canada. Some arenas, you know, my homecoming show here in Calgary at the Saddle Dome was just absolutely a blast. Great big sold out show, benefiting the Children's Hospital, my own old place that I used to work, and then even Europe. We had the chance to go and do some touring. We were in London, Birmingham, Bournemouth. We went to Glasgow, up to Amsterdam. Played a club called the Paradiso that the Beatles and the Stones had played in. It was just fascinating, you know. And we were opening those shows for Billy Ray Cyrus back in the day, which is crazy. Oh man,
I'm going back to all these days, all these songs you're naming, because I grew up in Saskatchewan, so of course it's the heartbeat of like they love the country music where I grew up. So this was always on the radio.
Totally,
all these songs. Yeah, Billy Ray, Achy Breaky.
Yeah, so and we were getting to interact with and open for and play with the cream of the crop. You know, anyone in that '90s country era, we were around those people, right? So pretty cool.
And then, so you're doing this, and what are these next years like for you? Like, it's just like
it's a blur,
really,
a total blur. There were some days we'd hit 5 cities a day.
Wow,
where you just feel like a FedEx package, and you show up. It's very much like, you know, you see the political campaigns.
Yeah,
you're just in front of a new audience every day, and you just show up, smile, and do the best you can with whoever's in the room, right? And so it was a blur. We're traveling all over. The first album went, I think it ended up being double or triple platinum here in Canada, and it was a gold record in the US. Sold over 1 million records around the world.
Wow.
Number 5 song was our first song, and it was called My Heart Has a History.
Yes.
And then I Do was a number 1.
Of course.
And we were just riding high, and then we hit a wall. The music industry shifted big time. It went from about a $32 billion a year industry to about a $3 or $4 billion a year industry when the digitization of music happened, and you know, the MP3. And I remember talking to the head of the label that I was with, Reprise Records under Warner Brothers. What's your digital strategy? You know, as a kid, I was into, like, I saw LimeWire happening. I saw all this Napster, all that stuff, and it was like, this is the future of music. And I remember asking them, you know, what's your digital strategy? And he laughed. He said, it's a passing fad.
Really?
He said, trust me, this is the CB radio. It'll be here today and gone tomorrow.
Wow.
And I think the industry, it was the canary in the coal mine. It was the first to be digitized, and nobody knew what it meant. And there were some, obviously, the visionary people, but the majority of the industry didn't know. And that started to send things into a tailspin in the industry that forced us to have to make some really hard decisions.
Right. Because the thing about what people don't understand about that, it's like the whole Blockbuster Netflix thing where they don't take it serious, but they don't see the trend for what it is, because the majority of the money then for artists comes through touring, I'm assuming.
Right.
So you really got to get on the road, because albums are just more marketing now.
Right.
Because you're not, I've seen some of the Spotify checks from people, like you can get all these streams.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And it's very, very small.
Yeah, a million streams, I mean, you're lucky to, you know, generate $1,000. You know, like, yeah, absolutely.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
So how are artists making money?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is touring, merchandise. In that transition time, brand was huge, and we were very fortunate to be able to be on the front end of that. And I did see that as a real opportunity, you know, to be able to align with like-minded brands and find ways to be able to use my creativity. So you have to pivot, right? You have to figure out a way to shift it, right? And I would say that has been the main central piece of my entire career, is that looking around to figure out, okay, how do we do it now? You know, and not letting it be a roadblock, look for the opportunity, you know.
But was that frustrating for you? Because if you would have been in your career 5 years earlier, you would have had 5 extra years of that wave.
Yeah, maybe. I think that there's a sense of calling in this for me. Like it doesn't feel like a profession. It feels like a vocation. And you know, the word, I mean, I go back to my word nerd days, you know, vocation, that Latin root is actually, it means a calling. It's you hear something that tells you to do it, and that's what this has been for me. It's been very much. It feels like there were things that were set in place that allowed me to do this. And so when you see things get in the way, you go, oh, it's not time to stop. It's just time to do it different, right? Because my calling is to do this. I was made to do it, right?
So you never feel that attitude of like I missed out, or
you do, but I think that you realize that it's only self-defeating to have that. You know, I think it's natural to look back and ask what if, but I think it's really important to go. You know, let's look into the future and ask why not. What can we do with this, right? And you know, I heard a really wonderful. It's actually on YouTube. It's an artist who painted. He did pointillism, and so you know, like the fine dots, right? And incredibly talented. In art school, was OCD about his art. Couldn't stop doing this pointillism work to the point that he damaged the nerves in his hand, and he couldn't do it anymore. He still could see it in his head, but he couldn't access it physically. So he asked himself, "Well, how can I do this?" And he started getting contracts with businesses in downtown cores and doing pointillism on a grand scale on the sides of giant buildings because he could still see everything in his head. He couldn't do it with his hand, but he could do it with a bunch of painters, right? And so he found a different way to do it. And I think that's that key mentality to the pivot is, okay, now what? How do we do this now?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the pivot, because the name of this podcast is The Pivot Year. The whole reason for that is, you know, sometimes people, they have dreams or goals or aspirations and they take on too much too quick, and then they just give up because they're overwhelmed themselves. But I'm encouraging people that, you know, moving towards your goal slowly. It's about the small pivots that eventually lead you to where you need to be. And so you've mentioned the pivot. You're no stranger to the pivot.
Well, I actually did. I did a TED Talk.
Oh, did you?
I actually did.
I believe you.
And believe it or not,
I believe you did a TED Talk.
It's called The Art of the Pivot.
Did you?
I did. And
when did you do this?
So this was probably about 3-4 years ago. And
so you're familiar with the pivot? Check
it out on YouTube. And it's like the most like ADD, like stream of consciousness TED Talk you're ever going to hear.
Okay.
That takes you from some of the stories we've been talking about getting a record deal, through the decline of the music industry, being a registered nurse, traveling around the world, having opportunities to be confronted with issues like, you know, homelessness and poverty and food insecurity, human trafficking, and then shifting into the work that we're doing today with our organization called Not in My City. And so it's it's always been about, like, I start the TED Talk saying that I'm not a country singer. That's not what I do. I'm actually a pivoter. That's my job. It's to be able to see whatever I can use my unique set of skills and abilities to be able to support. And I think it's also about figuring out your grand why. I got that term, that grand why, from a good friend of mine who was one of the founders of WestJet Airlines. And he talks a lot about figuring out what that main thing is that you're going to go after. And it's painful work to figure out what your grand why is. You could take a week and you'll probably like almost have a nervous breakdown. You'll be bawling your eyes out. You'll be struggling with yourself to admit what your grand why is, but it's such an important process. There's a great book, older book, but worth a read, called Halftime. And it's written by a guy named Bob Buford, and it was revolutionary for me and for Liz in our approach to art and to this career. There was an atheist named Mike Cammey who was referenced in that book with a K, and Mike Cammey was the kind of idea marketing brand guru who brought Coca-Cola through the worst marketing debacle in history, and that was New Coke.
Oh, yes.
So when they came out with New Coke, they lost billions in market share overnight. It was like, everyone was like, what are you doing, right? So they call Mike Cammey, and he's very like just ruthless in his analysis. And he puts up this great big whiteboard or piece of paper, and he says, okay, tell me what is in the box. And they're looking at him like, what are you talking about, right? So he draws a box, and he's trying to help Coke to figure out what they're about, the grand why, right? And so they said, okay, so you got new Coke. What is it that you're going to put in the box as your guiding principle, the main thing that you do, right? And so they started just spouting stuff off. What's Coke about? First cola product in the world. American, American originality, great taste, apple pie, the American way, like all these different things. And he says, okay, so what did you put in the box for New Coke? And they said, well, great taste. And he's like, so let me get this straight. You got rid of American tradition in favor of great taste. And they were like, oh no, what did we do, right? So what happens is you put all these things on the page, all the things. So for me, it was, our faith. One of the most important, I would say, the most important thing in our life, being able to be creative and be in the music industry. Our marriage was there. Wanting to have kids someday. We didn't have kids at that point, and we're putting them all on this board. But the issue where it gets hard is you can only pick one. Mm-hmm. And then that one, once you figure out what the main thing is, everything else on that page will serve that main thing. So the other things don't have to leave. So with Coke, Great Taste didn't have to leave. They just put American tradition back in the box. The next day they came out with Coke Classic, and they regained all their market share because people knew what they were about, right? And for me with music, that was a really important thing, because as you get more and more successful as a creative, it's not about making choices between better and bad, or good and bad. Those are fairly easy. I don't want that gig because that gig's not for me. But you're making choices between better and best because you're having all these awesome opportunities come your way. And parsing that is hard if you don't know what you're about.
Right.
Right.
And this is a huge thing for creators, because I was talking about someone about this earlier, and maybe you feel this in the music industry. But you are figuring out your why, your style, but then you're also surrounded by a saturated market of someone's trying this and it's working, and someone's trying that and it's working. Yeah. Same thing with us, as social media creators. Some people are doing get ready with me's or vlogs, or some people are doing super cinematic, or some people are doing really bad content on the phone, and it's all working. Right. And you as a creator are going, wait, I kind of like it all, but I'm trying to figure out my voice, my style. Is that the same where you're like,
yes,
you see 100%. It's all working, but you're like, okay, what's my thing?
Yeah, I think that, there's a concept that I'm getting more and more comfortable with. And I don't think it's just as a result of having done this for 28 years now, and so I'm comfortable, and that's easy for you to say. Mm-hmm. This is something that we kind of stumbled on early in my career that has made all the difference. It's not wise to compare yourself.
Yeah.
It's not wise.
Right.
It's only going to lead you to looking away from what your grand why is to looking at what everyone else is doing. And it diminishes you. It makes you start to feel like you're not good enough, like you're chasing something. And I think it's important to be aware of what's going on around, and you can appreciate, but no one else can do what you do. No one else can see it or sing it or write it the way that you do. And so when you stay focused on what it is that you're doing, rather than trying to one up somebody or hit the hottest trend, eventually it pays off. And in the short term, it can be really hard. I remember writing with Pat Alger, and Pat wrote some of Garth Brooks' hugest hits. Came out of the Greenwich Village, New York songwriting scene. Just legendary writer. And we're writing together. And he kind of looks at me, and I'm a real singer-songwriter style, just like him. So it was a really cool moment to be able to write with this guy. Hall of Famer, right? And he goes, Paul, he says, don't change. He said, right now, the singer-songwriter movement is starting to wane. He says, but it'll come back. And he's like, I never would have dreamed when I started doing what I was doing in New York that some kid named Garth Brooks was going to record my music, but it was just the right time. Right. And I know that now that might not be my time. Right. But I'm going to do what I was made to do, what I feel inspired to do, Mm-hmm. So you're always growing. You can try new things, but you got to kind of figure out what that thing is for you,
So the big question is, how did you find your why?
Yeah, I think for me, it's very much related to faith. There's a concept called Great Commission and Great Commandment that people in the Christian faith understand. And to people who don't share that faith, I say that in a lot of ways it's like loving your neighbor. That's a good way to describe it, or helping your neighbor to help other people. Those types of ideas. And for me, that when I wrote everything on that whiteboard, that was the central thing. It was with gentleness and respect to go out into everywhere that I go and help people to understand the hope that I have with my faith. But to do it in a way where it's not ramming ideology down people's throats, just to kind of be open to having those spiritual conversations with people, and then loving people, and being a good neighbor to people, and seeing people as being worthy of support and as important as I am. Those are things that are really important to me and to my wife Liz. And so everything in the career started to kind of go through that funnel. So, when it came to music, how can I use music to do those things, to inspire people and get them to ask questions about the things that they believe, or to help, to be helpful to them in some way? How can I use my art? Before I create anything, and it doesn't even have to be art, it can be in business or whatever, I always ask the question, what does the world need? That's the first thing that I ask. And then that's sort of the trigger for me to start to move in a direction. And it's really been helpful to me to kind of stay focused,
You've described yourself, you said I'm not a country singer, I'm the pivoter, which I love that. You are multifaceted. That's one thing I appreciate about you. We first met actually when you came to our...
on a beach.
On a beach. It was very windy.
It was very windy.
You came to our very second Socality event in Portland.
Yeah, in Oregon. Yeah.
And my friend messaged me, Greg Sabell, and he's like, Paul Brandt's coming. I'm like, wait, what? Canadian legend music superstar is coming to Socality, which is like this hipster photography thing.
I felt just a little bit out of place.
And then I was like, I didn't believe it. And you showed up in Portland, Oregon.
I loved it.
We went to Cannon Beach and just like, it was the windiest day. They actually were telling us to evacuate. And of course, we're out there taking photos and all the photos of like umbrellas breaking, epic photos, by the way. And you came, and I was so encouraged, that someone of your caliber, would come to our event. Cause Socality, it's a Calgary-based, Alberta launched organization, and everyone thought we were California based just because the name and the look had that feel. But to have your support meant the world to me because we were just young.
Well, I love the passion behind it, and I learned a ton. I'm not a photographer and not generally a very visual person. I can tell if it looks good, but I'm not the one to piece it all together. So I really enjoyed sticking my iPhone in front of whatever you were taking pictures of. I learned a lot.
That's how we all do it.
Oh man,
when you're taking a photo, we just stick our camera in front.
I learned so much from you,
first.
and it was obvious, I think, in the work that Socality was doing that there was a real spirit of excellence.
Yes,
and just a desire to really foster that creative community.
That's right.
And so we were all shaking sand out of our boots for days after that. And then we ended up having the opportunity to travel to Israel together, which was just an incredible time.
We've actually done a lot, because we went to Israel together, which was amazing. Yeah. What a trip that was. And then, I shot your album cover.
That's right.
Which I've got that. What album was that?
So we did a vinyl for a project. It was an EP called Frontier.
Yes.
And that was, and we literally saw a bear that day. I don't know if you remember.
We did. And the parks
we're out in Kananaskis and there's a bear wandering along. No big deal.
And meanwhile, you're on the road, I'm on the road taking your photo.
Epic shot. Incredible shot. Right? And
we've done a lot together. And
you're
the pivoter. Your college are the pivoter. So you have, one thing I've seen about you through the years is you sing country music, you do your country, your tours, but you do throw your voice behind causes or things that matter to you, which was the birth of Not in My City.
Yeah. So we had been doing work with different humanitarian aid organizations, and often when you have a platform, there are charities that want to leverage that, and so we had found a couple different organizations we worked with. We did some work in Ethiopia with World Vision and with Malawi, Southeastern Africa. Malawi was our first international trip, and it was at the peak of the AIDS epidemic in that part of the world. And the things that we saw just, absolutely opened our eyes. I remember one story, I love to tell of a woman that we met there, this Malawian woman, was living in a community development project where there had been a well built and homes were being built, and it was small house that was built, but it was on a concrete foundation, and it was a brick house. It had a good roof on it, and she brought us inside and was speaking through a translator, and you just like absolutely charismatic, proud woman. And she looks at me and then she starts talking to Liz to make this woman to woman contact. And she says, I'm a kitchen technician. She's talking through this translator, right? She says, I teach the women in my village how to cook and how to clean, and I show them how to do this. And she points to the corner, and there was a little brick and mortar box, and in the front was an opening, and there were some ashes in there. And she says to Liz, now this is a stove. You take this pot full of water, and you put it on top of the stove, and it
Wow.
it makes it safe for us to drink, right? Yeah. And I look over at Liz and we're like, blah, we're bawling our eyes out. Because I mean, this thing that we take for granted, we turn on the tap and it was like, this had saved her children's life. Right? Yeah. And so you take that with you, you know, and then you come back to this world. And I remember we were in Nashville and the grocery store chain down there is called Kroger, right? Yeah, Kroger's, right? And we're at Kroger's. It was right around Thanksgiving. And we're standing over a freezer full of Thanksgiving turkeys. And it's just the two of us, right? And we got in like one of those like newlywed arguments over what size turkey we needed for Thanksgiving, you know? And we're like just going at it over this freezer. And then our eyes met. And I think simultaneously we remembered that woman. Right. And we just started to weep over top of these stupid turkeys, right? Because it was like, we have so much, you know? Yeah. And so, you know, we took that and we kind of continued to lean into using this platform, whatever it was, to be a billboard. You know, I mean, it draws a lot of attention when you wear a cowboy hat and you go around singing, and you can use that to help people to see other things. So we've worked with a lot of different organizations, and about 7 years ago started this organization, Not in My City, that focuses on human trafficking and sexual exploitation, especially as it relates to kids, because we really see that there's a progressive nature to human trafficking and exploitation that's often rooted in early childhood trauma. And so we've been doing that. It's becoming more and more of a focus for me now, yeah.
One thing that, you know, when we're talking about that topic, which is so intense, is we often think it's in another land. Yeah. Like it's out there, that happens in Asia or whatever, but it's happening in Canada.
Yeah.
Which is...
Yeah, over 90% of trafficking victims in Canada are Canadian. They don't come from another country.
Really?
They're Canadians. And you know, one of the things that we talk a lot about in this work is that of the entire population of Canada, about 4% of Canada's population are Indigenous. So just 4%, right? But they represent over 50% of trafficking victims in this country.
Wow.
And so there's that disproportionate, you know, representation in the numbers. And I think one of the reasons is we talk a lot about vulnerability in this work. Human trafficking looks different. Like, you know, you see the movie Taken, or you see...
Which is where I first learned about it.
Or The Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
And you see this image of guys pulling up in a white van and stealing someone, or you see someone building a brothel in the third world and stealing children or whatever. And it's not to say that that doesn't happen, but that's not the way that we generally see it happen in Canada. In Canada, it's often this boyfriending technique where here's the progression.
Okay.
You get a you know, average age of first being abused, or you know, often sexually abused, is usually around 7 years old, and so that they call it an ACE, adverse childhood event.
Okay.
Those adverse childhood events, they actually score people based on how many adverse childhood events they've had, and that increases their quotient for vulnerability. And it also, it's indicative of how much damage has been done to the brain. Because with these early childhood traumas, there's actually physical and chemical changes to the brain. So that changes the way that you cope. And if you don't have a strong social support system, often it's, you know, self-medicating, drugs, alcohol, or risky behavior. The average age of being trafficked in Canada is 13 years old, and so, you know, it's pretty you know, very developmental phase in your life, and you can be very vulnerable to influence. And traffickers are really adept at identifying those vulnerabilities. Right?
So what does that mean? Because I do think of the white van. You know, what does that mean then for the 13-year-old? How are they being trafficked?
Yeah, so one example of a young woman who's escaped trafficking now and exited her trafficking situation here in Canada, she talks about how, you know, it wasn't a horrible family upbringing, but you know, she didn't always get the attention that she wanted. She started acting out. I'm not sure that abuse was a part of her story, but she ended up getting into drugs, and she ended up, you know, one day being at a place where people were using, and this guy walks in, and he just paid all the attention in the world to her. He asked her, what was it that got you to start doing drugs in the first place? told her how beautiful she was, made sure she had what she needed, a place to stay, good food, whatever she wanted. And she said that during that time, her life was better than it ever had been before. And most survivors, we hear that. We hear them say that, that grooming time, right, or that boyfriending, love bombing time was the best my life had ever been. And then often what happens is the trafficker is following a pretty set pattern where he'll continually ask the victim to do things that maybe make them more and more uncomfortable. Go and steal something or do something sexually that they're not comfortable with.
Developing control over that.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
And the victim doesn't want to see whatever's happening go away. They're in love with this person. They actually often don't even understand they're being trafficked. Wow. Sometimes I talked to a survivor yesterday who didn't realize she had been trafficked until 10 years after exiting her trafficking situation. Wow. She didn't know what it was, right? And that's very common. And so trafficking victims will identify with their abusers and with their traffickers to the point that they'll defend them.
Because they don't want to paint them as the bad person.
Right.
Because they have shown them.
Right.
This is the thing about abuse is, oh no, they do love me. Right. They said they're sorry.
Well, I mean, in this case with this young woman, she confided in her trafficker as they developed that relationship that the one thing she always wanted was for someone to tell her that they were proud of her.
Right.
And after he forced her to, have sex for the first time with a stranger for money and give him the money, he came in the room after that guy left and sat down on the bed next to her and said, "I'm so proud of you." And they get in your head, right? And then they've got you, and they'll use drugs and coercion. Trafficking is force, fraud, and coercion facilitated by a third party. It's something someone does to you, and they make money from you, right? And so, that progression happens from early childhood trauma to self-medication often and bad coping mechanisms to someone paying attention to them, first trafficking, repeated trauma. Average number of years of being trafficked is 7 years. So if you were first trafficked at 3 or 13, and then you go through those 7 years, now you're 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and society sees you as someone who chose it.
Right.
Well, was there a choice?
Shame.
Was there a choice,
yeah.
Right? And so that's what we're trying to help people to kind of awaken to in Canada.
Wow.
And not in my city, it's just amazing to see how well accepted it's been. We're, I believe, in 13. I think we're launching another one soon. 14 airports across the country,
right.
Awareness and education.
Yeah.
And we're heavily involved now in the setup of the new Alberta Office to Combat Trafficking in Persons. So 7 years ago when we started this, top law enforcement, I would say no fault of their own, they were telling us in consultation meetings that human trafficking doesn't happen here. And they believed that. And now we're in a place where the government, we turned in recommendations to the government on how to address this issue, and they've accepted these recommendations. They've put forward almost $23 million now over the next 4 years to address this issue. So there's a rapid growth and awakening that went from it doesn't happen here to we're going to do something about what is one of the fastest growing crimes in Canada. So it's exciting. We're seeing a huge change.
So with this, I mean, I imagine, you're lending your voice to this. This is a burdensome cause for you. In some ways.
Yeah.
Because it's heavy.
Yeah, it's really heavy. And for us, a really personal story. I mean, it was, we saw trafficking activity happening in Southeast Asia. And my wife, Liz, lets me share some of her story. But we saw a group that was there working on behalf of child trafficking victims. And what they would do is they would pay the rate that someone would have paid to take a child and use them for the day. And instead they'd take them to a safe location and just let them be kids. But under Cambodian law and custom at that time, those kids were actually seen as being owned by the brothel owner. So they had to take them back into these horribly abusive situations. And that was pretty trauma-inducing, I would say, just to see, right? Let alone experience. And Liz, in her story, she has a past with childhood sexual abuse, and it reopened that wound for her. And so she got quite ill for a long time, and trafficking made a dent in our lives in a really unique way and made us want to really lean in. So we're in this for the long haul. Right. She's doing great today and recovery wise and everything. But I think the main message I want people to know about trafficking, remember pre 9/11. I remember I was touring during that time, and I mean you could literally show up at the airport with a rental car, drop the rental car off, grab your guitar, run to the gate, buy a ticket, get on the plane. I'd play a couple songs for the flight attendants. They'd upgrade me to first class. It was awesome, right?
Yes, of course.
And I mean, it was just so open, and there wasn't all the security concern. Yeah. But once 9/11 happened, we were taught that if there's a stray piece of luggage in the corner, that could be a risk.
Yes.
And that was never on our radar.
Never.
Right? No. And we're at that moment, I think, in Canada where we're not like back then it was like, I'm not afraid of that bag. I just recognize it could be a risk.
Right.
I know the signs and I know what to do about it. I tell this guy, right? And that's the same thing with trafficking. Once you know the signs and empower yourself, then you have someone to tell, well, then there's a response. So there's hope in it, right? Because we can actually prevent it and we can stop it from happening. It's one of the only crimes in the world that just through awareness, you can actually stop it from happening.
Right.
And so traffickers make an average of $280,000 per year per victim in Canada.
Wow.
It's a $180 billion a year industry. Wow. So huge. And organized crime is a part of it as well, right? But you can force that business model from being a low risk, high profit business that nobody really knows that they're doing to being high risk. Because you're telling people what you're seeing and low profit. So you can disrupt it.
Right.
And so if you go to notmycity.ca, we have a free e-learning program that we're pushing out to people. It takes about 25 minutes. You get a cool little certificate you can print off and everything. And we've had almost 10,000 people take that now. And it's growing, right? It's growing right across the country. So take that, share it with someone. And and then you can be a big part of the solution. And there's hope, right?
That's good to know. Like what you said is very eye-opening. Like for me, like as someone, observing the signs. So you're saying because if you're in it, you're young and you don't know but you're saying it mostly is vulnerable people are exposed. Yeah. Is this traditionally what's happening? Like if you come from which speaks to the power of family, because is it happening to people that are coming from really strong invested families?
It doesn't discriminate.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it can hit anyone regardless of where they're coming from in life.
Interesting.
But we see often that anyone who has those added vulnerabilities, right? That maybe make them more easy to be taken advantage of in some way. Some cases that I've heard of people with autism or FASD or those types of things where their ability to be within society allows them to sometimes be taken advantage of. But it can just be a person not being aware of what the risks are, right?
Yeah, it's good. You're shining a light on it.
Trying to.
And you're doing a good job. And these things are, when I mean burdensome, because you've chosen to carry that cross. And, because you could just be the country singer. You could just be the guy that pulls out the guitar and makes everybody happy.
Yeah, I don't know. Like it feels like there's not a lot of meaning in that. Like when you're making art, for me, it's always about trying to elevate something. Yeah. And I think it doesn't matter. I think artists have to decide what that is, what they're going to elevate, and that's up to everyone to figure out for themselves. And for me, elevating these causes, but also I believe that the issue of human trafficking is so central to society. All of the things that we're going through, just the turmoil that we're seeing in society today, we're making decisions about whether we're going to choose to see people based on what victim group they're a part of, or we're going to choose to see people as individuals of infinite value. And this concept of human trafficking, what it does by nature is it dehumanizes and devalues each individual. And so if we as a society decide that we're going to elevate people as priceless, then we actually start to build community and we create safety within the community. And so I get to be able to use art to shine a light in that way. It's so fulfilling to me. I just really, really enjoy it. And as it's grown, this has actually sort of become the main thing. And now music, I'll still do music, I'm still recording, but I'm not in that as much as I used to be because I'm just so passionate. Like when we turned in these recommendations to the government on how to address this issue in Alberta, the first thing that happened when it went public, they put it on their website, my phone blew up.
Of course.
And it was survivors.
Oh.
Finally, we're seen. Finally, someone did it the way that needed it to be done, right? Yeah. And we've been mounting a human trafficking response in Canada to this modern day slavery for over 20 years.
Wow.
And that moment for me, it was like, man, that's the standing ovation in front of 100,000 people.
Right.
It was incredible.
So you don't care, people say, because these topics can be divisive.
Sure.
So you lose fans. So I'm no longer a Paul Brandt fan because, I imagine there's, that doesn't bother you.
Yeah. No, I think that, because I know what I'm about and why I do what I do, for me, it's just about chasing after that, I mean, it's nice when people support you, but you have to develop a bit of a thick skin too, and just go, okay, I know why I'm doing what I'm doing.
You're not losing sleep over this. You're not like whatever. You're Paul Brandt, but you don't really, you care what people think.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you want to make a connection with the audience. Yeah. I find that for me, one of the things I love the most is to be able to be in an audience where there's a lot of diversity, and you try and find a common ground.
Yeah.
I remember one really cool moment. We were playing an arena tour. This was right before the pandemic. So during the pandemic, all music was shut down. You couldn't work at all.
Right.
So I had a lot of spare time on my hands, but right. I should have wrote a few albums maybe during that time, right?
Like Taylor Swift.
Yeah,
just
totally, right? Just pop out some more songs,
Yeah,
But we did this arena tour, and it was just a blast. And, we set it up to try and like counter our ADD lifestyles, because everyone is always on their phone, right?
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
But one of the comments that we got, and it was hilarious, there's almost this frustration from the audience. It was like, we didn't know where to look because you had stages all over the place, and we didn't know where people were going to come out. And we had a number of artists on that tour. And so it was great because people had to engage. And there's one moment where we set up a stage in the middle of the whole arena. And all the lights come down. It's just a really cool moment, and all around were it looked like church windows. And I started talking about this issue that we're talking about of freedom, and I started bringing people into those early days that we talked about earlier, of how I used to go to a church where they would sing a cappella music and no instruments, and they would sing these old songs like "The Old Rugged Cross" or "How Great Thou Art," or this one song that I know everyone in the room knows. A song called "Amazing Grace." And that song was actually written as a part of the abolitionist movement to end slavery. Most people might not be aware of that. And so, I'm looking out at this audience and trying to figure out, because, you just say the word church and that's divisive.
Oh,
right?
People shut off.
Right, totally, right? Yeah. But then I asked them and invited them, and I said, would you go to church with me for a minute?
Right.
And the lights come down, and I start singing into "Amazing Grace," and it's so cool because you look in the audience and you see some people like raising a beer, and then other people raising two hands like they're worshiping, and like this whole room came together around, what is this?
Yeah.
Let's figure out what this is, and then it's familiar, so they all started singing in one voice.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really my job, is to try and unify people and get them to think. It's not to try and like ram a message down their throats, but it's to get them to ask, what do I believe? What do I think? And to do that in a way that's not necessarily going to turn people off, right?
No, I know you talk about your faith a lot, and I know people can say, "Oh, whatever," but just like you said, someone's got a beer in the hand, someone's got their hand. Everyone, maybe not everyone, but there is a.
Some people were worshiping with the beer in their hand.
Right. They're the free. They're free.
Totally, right?
They're free. They're free Christians, but I do believe that most people, or some people at some point in time, have some encounter with church or faith, and some positive, some negative. There are people, like you said, you grew up in a church where, there's a lot of rules. Some people spend their whole life running from that. And I do think there's a thread of faith through people, and it is a very press the button topic, because it does, I think people still finding out where they land with that.
Yeah. And I think, that's the key, is to seek that out and figure out what you think. Like some of my most, I would say some of my favorite conversations have been with people who, maybe are atheist, or, don't espouse any type of faith. But they talk about things that inspire them and move them. And there seems to me to be this movement right now of exploration when it comes to ideas about faith, because people know that there's something more. I think that just the way that humans are wired, we know that there's something that's bigger than ourselves. There's a sense of that. And for me, I just try and encourage people to, if they want to hear about what I believe, and I'm happy to talk to them about it. But I want to encourage people just to chase that muse, to try and ask questions and get to the root of it until you feel like you're settled, and that's something that I've tried to use my music for, to evoke those grand themes.
Right.
Like one of the things I love, I think I talked about this in an article that I worked on for Socality at one point. It was like, the movies Star Wars.
Right.
What is that? What's the mega theme of that? It's the epic battle between good and evil in unseen realms. And I think there's a reason that inspires people and draws people. It's because we all kind of think maybe there's something to it. Titanic.
Yes.
The boy gives up his life unconditionally for the girl, right? There's something about that draws us. And I think that that's proof in some ways that that we are all connected in some way,
right?
And around these spiritual concepts.
Yeah, no, that theme runs rampant through history.
Sure.
You know, love, sacrifice, you know, loss, good, evil.
Right.
And so you've got to start wondering, like, what's that about?
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Why is this story that resonates with people, you know, constantly in our face?
Totally.
You know, and there is something there. And I do think too, with country music, you guys almost have even that extra little bit.
There's this
country
cool,
and faith. There's some reason.
Well,
It's
I'll
storytelling.
tell you, there's a cool history to that,
Yeah.
actually, that I love talking about. You know, when you go to the Grand Ole Opry,
Yeah.
the original Grand Ole Opry is an old church building in downtown Nashville, and it was called the Ryman Auditorium. And I, you know, moving to Nashville, I had no idea the history or what that was all about. I didn't grow up with that. But I learned that there was a riverboat captain back in the early days of Nashville that owned a bunch of bars and casinos. And there was this tent revival meeting that was going on in downtown Nashville, and it wasn't good for business. People are going to church instead of going to the bar. And so he decided to bring a bunch of his buddies to go down to this tent and heckle the preacher. He was like, "Get out of town, buddy," you know, and so, but he listened to the preacher, and what he said made sense to him, and so he decided that he was going to adopt that faith. And he said to the preacher, "Preacher, you're never going to preach in a tent again." He's a very wealthy man, and he built him a church in downtown Nashville, and that became known as the Ryman Auditorium. So for years, it was operated as a church. And then it fell into disrepair. And then this company called the National Life Insurance Company purchased the building and restored it. And the technology of the day was radio. And so they decided that they were going to start this radio program that would advertise their life insurance company all over North America. And the way that they would do it was to create something called the Grand Ole Opry. And so they would go out into the hills and find some hillbillies, and most of them were singing gospel music, right? And one of those hillbillies was Hank Williams.
Wow!
And so it's really interesting. If you go to Nashville, you got to check this out. So you got the Ryman Auditorium, then there's a back alley, and that's the stage entrance. And across the back alley is Tootsie's Wild Orchid Lounge, and like this place is like something else, right?
It's in the name.
Oh yeah. And so Hank would get up on stage and he'd sing "I Saw the Light." Or Amazing Grace or whatever. And then he'd go out the back door, across the alley, into Tootsie's and take a couple shots, and then he'd be back again and he'd sing another song, right?
Yeah.
And so that back alley has come to be known as the fine line between heaven and hell, right? And so everything about country music sort of centers around that metaphor where, you know, you always hear about, you know, the good and the bad and the, you know, all that kind of heaven and hell and all that kind of stuff and in the storytelling. And it's all about stories, right? And so I think that there's this sort of theme throughout country music that if you walk that fine line, if you walk that back alley between the mother church and Tootsie's, then God might just wink and let you in, you know? And so I think faith has a really deep connection to country music. There was a movie, it was called We Were Soldiers, that Mel Gibson you know, did. And so during the production of the movie, the production company enlisted songwriters in New York, Los Angeles, and Nashville to come together and screen it before it was public, and then challenged us to write songs that we were inspired to write. And if your song made it onto this project, that music project would be used to promote the movie. And so it was like the last day, and I watched this movie, and it's, if you've ever seen it, it's about this army captain in Vietnam who is just so self-sacrificial for his men. He understood that his was to be the first boot on the battlefield and the last boot to leave the battlefield. And he made that sacred promise to the wives of the men who were under his command. And it was such a metaphor, again, you talk about the metaphor of country music in that back alley, of like a Jesus type character, right? Who was willing to sacrifice. So me and my songwriting buddy, Steve Rosen, we watched the movie, we got together. It's the last day that we could turn in music. And we wrote this song called For You. And the whole thing was sort of us looking at the movie and the self-sacrificial character and thinking about the biblical account of the cross and pairing all these things together. And we turned it in the last possible day, and we get this phone call back in 5 minutes, like, "Well, you did it." And I'm like, "What did we do?" You know. And so the song got recorded, and it got the primary spot on that album. It was recorded by Dave Matthews. So I'm a huge Dave Matthews fan, and Johnny Cash.
Wow.
So Dave and Johnny did a duet together. for this song For You. And it's funny because like my grandmother.
And you wrote this?
Yeah, I wrote it with this friend of mine.
Wow.
And I mean, my grandmother I didn't realize this, but she used to mail order Johnny Cash music to the house, and she would hide in her bedroom with a guitar so no one could hear her playing. I didn't even know this happened. When she found out that Johnny Cash recorded a song that I had a part in writing, I mean, she thought I walked on water. Like it was something else, right? So that was, for me, like...
What an accomplishment.
But I guess to bring all that back, it's like country music has these connections to faith, and that connection to faith in my own life and through the art form led to, seeing the world, through the eyes of that army captain in a way that, again, evoked faith, right? And, a monumental figure, someone like Johnny Cash, that was the one who always stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. To sing a song like that, it's a pretty cool moment for me.
Did you ever get to touch base with him?
No, we did have contact with the family.
Right.
We believe it was one of the last songs he ever recorded.
Wow.
And he would go between reciting lines in books, like they were just trying to get his voice on record as much as possible.
Of course.
And singing this song and then going to play with his grandkids. And it was a pretty special moment.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty neat.
That must just feel so good.
Pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty fun. Yeah, huge honor.
You've written some amazing songs.
Thank you.
You mentioned I Do. And so 27 years marriage, which is amazing. Congratulations. I imagine not all easy.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of work.
For sure.
You sang that
mostly
song.
for my wife.
Yeah. Isn't that the way?
Oh, man.
It's always their fault.
I married up big time. Yeah.
You sang that song at our good friend John Sweet's wedding. Yeah. So I had the privilege of seeing you and Liz sing that together actually at the wedding. But that song for you, so you sing the song I Do. How have you made your marriage stay successful after all these years?
Yeah, I think for me and Liz, we've made that a priority, and I think it takes investment. It takes a lot of honesty and willingness to ask the tough questions and to be there for each other. And there's certain non-negotiables, and one for us has always been that we're always going to find a way to make this work. Like that's just the way that it is, right? And so. Now we've got an almost 16-year-old boy, almost 14-year-old girl, and we're really enjoying all those different stages. You go from pulling your hair out, how are we going to do this because you're getting up at 3 a.m. with babies, to now pulling your hair out because they want you to drive them everywhere, and like those kinds of things. And also now starting in a bittersweet and melancholy way, thinking about the moment that they're going to leave. They are,
They will.
and they're always a part of your life, but things are changing. And so that kind of brings it back to the pivot, doesn't it? Right? Like it's like you look at it and it's like everything is just layer upon layer of, what am I going to do with this moment right now?
Yeah.
And how do I make the most of it? Right?
Was there ever a moment, though, in the 27 years where you're like, it's over?
There were some moments where it was pretty intense.
Right.
I would say absolutely. Where, I had maybe said something that was super hurtful, where we weren't communicating in a way where we were understanding each other. I think that. Again, having a good network around you, good community around you who can be encouraging, who can play referee sometimes, all those kinds of things is super important,
And then Dear Song I Do, of course, would that ever ring in your head? Like, I wrote the song.
Yeah, I'm not going to write the divorce mix if I do. Are you kidding me? No, I can't do that.
You can't be that guy.
Yeah.
But it's almost like that art is like a weight for you. Like it brings you back to center.
Yeah, and I would say again, that grand why, I mean, for us, the thing that keeps us together when we don't like each other.
Yeah.
Because that happens in marriage, right? You love each other, but you really don't like each other at times, right? Is our shared faith, right? For us, that's really the glue. And I can't imagine two more different people. Honestly, like Liz
feel that way?
Oh man,
even still?
Oh yeah. Really? Liz's degree is in pure mathematics. She's a total brainiac, right? And I'm like this like hippie songwriter dude, who cries at the drop of a hat and loves to write poetry, artsy. I mean, it's oil and water, big time, right? And so if we didn't have at least our faith in common there, then I'm not sure how we ever would have been able to make it work. We'd be moving in two very opposite directions. For sure.
No, that's good because people listening, people that are your fans that are listening, they got some years behind them in their marriage, and I know that it's tough with kids. Yeah, we're in that situation.
All those pressures.
Pressure of life, pressure of finance. Yeah. I do think too, as you age, you do become different people.
Yeah.
You know, and like you know, when you started singing, you didn't know that you'd be leading an organization.
Totally.
And, you know, and your wife is developing into interests and stuff that she didn't see herself.
Totally.
You know, and so it's like you are becoming one, but you're also still growing and evolving. And these things, and then you add kids in the mix.
Yeah.
You know, and I throw a pandemic in there.
Yeah.
You throw the relatives in there, you know, and these are tough times, and life gets tough, and things get hard for marriages.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, it's songs like I Do, and those reminders of faith, and those things about like, hey, wait a minute, what is at the center? And I think, you know, we can lose sight, you know, and so it's encouraging to hear.
I think that those concepts of, you know, commitment and longevity in a relationship and all of that kind of stuff, you know, for us it's really been a key part of it, you know, and going back to what are the things that drew us together, and also like supporting each other and helping each other to grow. Like Liz, like we talked about the difference between being nice and being kind. She will ask me some tough questions. She will say, hey buddy, you need to check this out right now because you're moving in this direction, right? And she leaves the door open for me to do the same, you know, and I'm so thankful for that, you know, that honesty and that ability to have those hard conversations. It's super important.
Another song you've written, of course, the classic Alberta Bound.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Alberta Bound.
Alberta Bound.
It was, so Alberta Bound is really interesting because I thought that it would be a regional hit. Like I thought, okay, they're going to play it in Calgary, maybe in Edmonton, Lethbridge, whatever, right?
But local hockey staple.
Yeah, right. You know, and so I came home. It was actually just a little later in the year than now. You know, the running joke is in Calgary, if you don't like the weather, you wait for 2 minutes. And it was like almost June, and we had this dump of snow. Like it was just crazy.
Yeah.
This huge dump of snow falling down. We were visiting from Nashville. We were only here for a day or two. And I'm sitting next to a fireplace, and this is where I was born. I love this place.
Yeah.
And those huge, you know, like snow globe clumps of snow are slowly falling, and the fire is flickering. And it was like 3 or 4 minutes, and the song was written. Like I literally, it was like channeling.
Wow.
And I think, you know, when you're really into your art, there are those moments where you look back at that picture, or you read that song, and everything rhymes. Where you go, how did that happen?
Yeah.
You know, you'd be silly to take credit for it, really. And so yeah, it's like, you know, start reading these words back. And I remember the first time I played it was in Williams Lake, British Columbia. Probably a poor choice of venue.
Not even,
you know, not even in Alberta, right? You know. And there's this one cowboy dead center who like was not buying what I was selling. Like I mean, his hat pulled down, his mustache is sticking out, arms are crossed, and like he just looked angry. Then I got to the part of the song, I've been Alberta bound for all my life, and I'll be Alberta bound until I die. And for the first time in the whole show, his beady little black eyes pop up, and he nudges his wife, and he goes, "Yeah!" You know, he's totally into it, right? And so I realized then, okay, either this song's gonna be a bigger hit than I thought, or that guy's from Alberta. You know, one of the two, right? One of the two. And then people who didn't even know what an Alberta was, started to fall in love with the song.
Wow.
And even south of the border, people were grabbing onto the song. And I think the reason is because, you know, we talked about those universal things that connect us. It was about Alberta, but it wasn't. It was about heaven and home. A better place, opportunity, the Wild West. You know, all those things, right? And people resonate with that, you know, on I think a meta theme level. And I think one of the coolest highlights, Queen Elizabeth II came to Alberta to announce the QE2, our big road that is between Edmonton and Calgary, a big highway and that whole corridor. And it was during her Diamond Jubilee. And I was invited to come and sing the song for Queen Elizabeth II.
Okay, wow.
And so we were again at the Saddle Dome, you know, full circle again. And I played Alberta Bound, and she came backstage. And there was this nervous little man who was the protocol guy, who comes up and is like, this is what you're allowed to do and you're not allowed to do. You can't look her in the eye. Okay. You do not reach out your hand to shake. No. Okay. If she does,
you don't look in the eye.
No. And then if she reaches your hand, then you can shake it, okay? And then the first address is yes, your majesty, and then it's yes, ma'am. And, you know, right? She's telling me all this, and I'm trying to remember all this stuff, and she walks right up to me, reaches out her hand, and goes, I understand you've recently relocated here to Alberta. She says, you know, and I'm like, I forget what happened. I think it was actually an international incident, I'm pretty sure, because I don't remember anything that happened after that. But, like, it was cool. Like,
was it a quick interaction?
Yeah.
I would be so nervous.
I was super nervous. And there's this picture, and you can just tell.
Did you take the picture?
No. Like
I took it.
Oh yeah, I ended up. Someone took it.
So you didn't do a turnaround.
No. She's a busy woman. Right?
I can't believe that you can't look in the eye. What's the reason for that?
It's just this like reverence, right? Like she is the queen, right?
Wow.
So it was a cool moment.
Oh,
it was a really
so
cool
sad
moment.
The day she died, I loved the queen.
And then just
what an awesome honor to meet the Queen.
It was cool, and like
Wow.
after that, Will and Kate were in Calgary. I got a chance to play for them, and so like just how the music has sort of taken us to all these different places.
And was she rocking during Alberta Bound?
Did you look at her? Did you look at her?
See if the
She
Queen
might have tapped her
was
foot.
doing a tap?
I think she tapped her
Surely.
foot a little bit,
Yeah.
you know. But it was it's just taken us on so many cool journeys.
Wow,
right?
yeah.
Really
And,
fun.
but you know what you said about that is, you know, I think what you said about it resonates people because it's about home.
Yeah.
What is it about home that just stirs people?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's like that that place where you feel accepted, you know, and you can just be yourself and be comfortable, right? That connection that it's made with people, it's at a point now where it almost feels like it's an anthem.
It is an anthem.
Or this spiritual connection. When we played it here on tour here in Alberta, there was a moment where Terry was playing the song with me, and we were both Alberta kids, and we're singing the song together, and you get to the end of the song, and there was silence, and then everyone stood, and there was just this massive ovation for this song that went beyond the song, right? And for me, it's about that connection with people, right? So it was pretty neat.
I think
moment.
what is interesting about it, because I love it, it's the lyrics and it's the melody and everything. But there's a love-hate relationship we have with home. You know, it's like the snow. It comes in the snow and the treacherous roads, but then you get out to those mountains.
Yeah.
And you see those mountains. And every time I drive somebody to those mountains and I get to see it again through their eyes, I'm always amazed.
Yeah.
And you start to go, okay, wait a minute. You take the good with the bad.
Yeah.
And this is my home.
Yeah,
you
100%. I think that there's that line in the song that says like a Chinook wind keeps coming back again, you know, you take the good with the bad, and again, like we've been talking about so much in this, it's kind of neat how it's come up so many times. Is there's that perseverance piece and that pivot and shifting, knowing why you're doing what you're doing and what you're about, and you do have to kind of take the good with the bad, and just not let the bad stuff overwhelm. I've heard someone recently say that it's about failing as fast as you can, right? And then getting back up and trying that again, you know? So any creatives out there, please know, like, you're not alone.
Yeah.
I think everybody who ends up in this endeavor of creativity, you feel that way for sure.
You do.
And I think because we are built the way we are as creatives, the highs and the lows feel a lot higher and lower than they do maybe for a lot of other people. That's why we're so moved to, create, right? And that can be tough. It can be super tough.
The creators out there understand that internal struggle, of like creating and stop and succeeding and comparison and all these things are.
There's this song that was never released as a single that was my, I think, exploration into that. It's called "Learning How to Let It Go," and it talks about this concept of holding on to things loosely, where it's like I think it was Corrie ten Boom, Holocaust survivor who said that she started holding on to things loosely so that it wouldn't hurt as much when God ripped them out of her hands. And that idea of like stewarding and shepherding things and trying, there's actual effort to hold on to it, but not holding it onto it so tight that if it does get pulled away, that it destroys you, right? And I think that's a really key concept to creativity. Yeah.
What do you want people, when they remember the name Paul Brandt, to think about?
Yeah, I have another song called "What I Want to Be Remembered For." It's 1972 dash, and then you leave your legacy in the little space between. And for me, I hope that people see that I lived my life in a way where I was loving other people, that I was pointing them towards the big questions. And for me, that biggest question is, what are you going to do with this idea that there is a God that loves you? And I hope that people see that and they at least ask themselves the question, what do I think? What do I believe? And that the art and the music and what I was doing something that was making people's lives better in some way. For me, that's a day well spent, a life well spent. I actually have always started, everything that I've created, looking at it from the grave back. It's just an important practice for me. Is like, okay, am I going to be able to be proud of this, someday when people are looking at it, right? So that's what I hope, and we'll see where we go.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Finally, creators out there, young creators, young musicians out there right now, your advice to them?
Do it because you love it. I think that's the main thing. Like, I think that if you're trying to do it because you want to be popular, if you're trying to do it because you want to make money, those are all good things. But if you can't do it just for the love, the greatest artists I think that have ever lived are ones who did it for free or even paid for it. and they did it because they were compelled. There was that calling. It was a vocation. And when you do it that passionately, people can't help but notice. And if it's supposed to happen, if the timing's right, then things pop then, right?
Wow. Yeah. Paul Brandt,
thank you.
You have been a wealth of information.
It was fun, Scott.
Story after story after
great.
story. You know, you've inspired me, you've inspired our family, you've inspired our country. You know, and it's an honor to know you and that you would take time out of your busy schedule to come sit with me here and share for people out there. I know that everything that you're learning, everything you're doing is inspiration. So I want to thank you for your work with Not in My City.
Thanks so much.
I want to thank you for what you do for our country and the voice that you are to our nation, and for being a great family man and showing us how to do life.
Thanks, Scott.
So thank you.
Good to be
bless
here.
you. Thank you so much. All right. That was absolutely mind-blowing to have someone like Paul Brandt be on my podcast. I hope that you love that. I hope that it was inspiring, it was inspirational, it was encouraging to you. If you like this podcast, I'd like to keep doing it. And so one way that you can help me is by getting the love out there. If you share this video, like this video, leave a comment, start engaging with me. I want to know who you want to hear from, what you want more of, and you can follow my social media and of course follow Paul Brandt. I really appreciate you guys. I want to keep doing this, and so I want to thank you for all your love. One way to also support is watch another episode. They're starting to populate, more and more are coming, and so thanks for following the journey, and I can't wait to see you guys on the next one.